Yo guys, what is up? It's Deathfire D coming at you with another YouTube video, and this one is a Jeep video. Recently I just replaced my alternator in my 99 Jeep Cherokee, and no, this video isn't going to be showing you how to do that since there's already a wide variety of YouTube videos documenting how to do that. But what this video is going to do is explain all the things that could and most likely will go wrong when you're in the process of changing your alternator in your Jeep. Now, almost all of the videos that I've watched on YouTube make this process look really simple. And I agree. If this vehicle was newer and there wasn't a lot of rust and there was a little more space in the engine bay, then sure. This would be a super easy 20 to 30 minute replacement video or fix. But because the Jeep is so old, and I live on the East Coast where we get tons of snow and salt in the wintertime, there's a lot of rust and a lot of seized up bolts and things that just are not easy to release. So this video is just going to walk you through all of the things, little and big, that you might run into. So the first thing that I ran into was, as you can see, there's not a lot of room between my electric fan and the pulley here where the tensioner bolt is. So the problem is, before you do anything, you have to loosen up your serpentine belt. And in order to do that, there is a bolt down underneath by a pulley. I don't know if you guys can see it, but it's to the left underneath this pulley right there. There's a bolt to the left of where you see the pulley that you need to get in a wrench to loosen up. And once you loosen the pulley, it'll drop down a little bit and give you some slack in the serpentine belt. But because of this electric fan and how close it is, I just simply could not get my wrench in there. And when I did manage to get it in there, it was just super hard to turn. So what I ended up doing was undoing my electric fan belt. And I thought I'd be able to just pull it right out. But for some reason, this fan is just way too big. I couldn't pull it out because it would run right up against the pulley. So I just pulled as far up as I could so I could access the pulley underneath. That seemed to work. I did have to go underneath the Jeep to access it. Almost all the videos I saw show people doing it up here, where they just reach underneath with their wrench and wrench it. But I couldn't do that. I had to go underneath. And it was a real pain to loosen up. Another thing is the tensioner bolt up here. You need to loosen that up to get slack in the serpentine belt. Now the thing is, I replaced my serpentine belt a few months ago, so the belt is really tight. And even though I unscrewed that almost completely off, it still was really hard to get the belt off of the alternator pulley. So keep that in mind. If you have an older belt, though, you probably won't have this problem at all. It should just slip right off. But for mine, not the case. Let's see. The next issue, a lot of the videos, in fact, almost all of the videos, showed the easiest way to access the alternator was to remove the battery and remove the battery tray that's underneath. As you can see, the alternator's right there, that silvery thing that looks brand new, because it is brand new. But yeah, the best way to access it is indeed to get rid of the battery and the battery tray. But again, like I mentioned earlier, those bolts that are holding the battery tray in place are seized, they're rusted. And if you even put penetrating oil or WD-40 or any of that type of stuff, you're going to have to do it for a really long time because they're really seized in there. I ended up breaking all 3 bolts that hold the battery tray in place. I mean, it's not a huge deal. The battery's still pretty secure. It's not going to move around. But yeah, the tray is just hanging in there. So keep that in mind. You might want to have some extra bolts on hand. I didn't have any at the time. I'll probably come back to this because I need to replace the battery soon anyways. As you can see, it's like pretty shitty. It's all corroded and stuff. Yeah, and that's another thing, since we're talking about corrosion. Before you even replace your alternator, you should definitely check the negative and positive. Unhook them, clean them up with a wire brush, make sure there's no corrosion on it. Maybe put some whatever that grease is called, dielectric grease, I think. Put some of that on there, put it all together, and see if that helps your issue. If it doesn't, then maybe it is the alternator. But I'm not going to talk about troubleshooting. The next issue, if I can get in there. So there's obviously two electric wires that are connected to the alternator. They're pretty easy to undo. One is just a plug, and the other one is a little nut that you have to unscrew. The little nut's really easy to unscrew, but the plug is super, super hard because you can't really tell which part you're supposed to squeeze. And once you do find the spot that you're supposed to squeeze, it's just super, super hard to get your fingers in there. So you're probably going to spend some time getting in there and squeezing a bunch of spots and whatnot. I can't really help you with that. I just kept squeezing and moving my hand around and eventually got it, and it just clipped right. It came right out. I did try to get a screwdriver in there, but there wasn't enough room for that, so I gave up on that. The next issue that you're probably definitely going to run into are the bolts that are holding the alternator in place. There's one up top, and then there's another one underneath that I'm not going to be able to show you. Maybe I will be able to show you. Well, there's a bolt underneath. Now, the top one's pretty easy to remove. For me, anyways. It came right out. It wasn't rusted or seized. But the bottom one was in an awkward position where I really couldn't get it from underneath. And when I did get it, it was so seized in there that even using a breaker bar or a cheap bar didn't really help. I used hammers. I mean, if you do this if you replace this alternator, don't use manual tools, use air tools, because it's going to make it so much easier. You might break the bolt, but at least it'll come out and you can replace it. This took me literally like 20 minutes of spraying with WD-40 and stuff, and just working it back and forth, and eventually the bolt came out. It was just such a time sink. This process would have went so much smoother if they just came right out like in all the other YouTube videos. And the last issue that I ran into that you may not run into is getting the alternator out of the vehicle to begin with. You don't really have a lot of space in here, as you can see. And a lot of people, they'll pull it from up here, they'll pull it out where the battery tray is because there's enough room. But in my case, I did a coolant filter mod a few years ago. So I have these extra long coolant filters, or not coolant filters, extra long hoses going from the radiator to my heater core down underneath to a coolant filter. So I couldn't pull the alternator up here. It was just in the way. So I had to go underneath, and underneath is just as bad. There's wires everywhere. There's just the hoses wrap around and stuff. So I really had to like turn the alternator upside down and sideways and all these different ways to get it out. It took a lot more time than it really should have. And when I got it out, getting the new alternator in was just as big of a pain. I had to do all of this underneath the Jeep because I couldn't get it up where the battery tray is. So again, you guys might not run into this because you might have more room than me. I've got extra hoses and whatnot. But just keep that in mind because there really isn't a lot of room to work with here. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Putting it all back together again was a breeze. It took me like 10 minutes to do. Taking everything apart, though, was a completely different story. It was not as straightforward as the other YouTube tutorial videos that I had seen. And it was really deceiving because there was even a YouTube video where a 12-year or 10 to 12-year-old girl did all of this whole process within the course of 30 minutes. So it really was a killer seeing that and realizing that I just spent over an hour doing this myself. So keep all of this in mind. Don't get discouraged if you run into something that's taking you way longer than it should. These Jeeps are old. There's a lot of rust inside of them. The bolts are seized in. And a word of advice, as you're doing this, start replacing stuff. If you run into a really rusted bolt, or your hose looks pretty ratty, replace all of that stuff. It's going to make the Jeep last longer, and it's going to make it much easier later on when you need to get in there and remove stuff or replace things. So yeah, I hope this video helps you guys out, or at least get you prepared for what you might run into when working on your Jeep and replacing the the alternator. Yeah, this is definitely something that anybody could do. Don't go to a garage for it. I was getting quotes for almost $450, but I ended up buying the alternator for around 120 bucks. So much cheaper. And it only took me an hour and a half to 2 hours. But if your Jeep isn't rusty, again, it should only take around 30 minutes. So yeah, stay tuned for more videos, guys. I've got a longer video explaining where I've been and why I haven't been making videos. No, it's not just about the YouTube apocalypse or any of that other bullshit. There's much more to it. So stay tuned. Give me a like. Give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel. Give me a comment below if you've got any questions or comments or suggestions to the channel. It's all greatly appreciated. Peace out, guys.